second part of the paragraph, that looking at the snapshot of economy tells us very little. So Jeff Booth has really made this idea mainstream now. That if you so Jeff Booth is a Bitcoiner who wrote a book called How to The Price of Tomorrow, and that book is a really popular book among Bitcoiners. I personally liked it a lot because I remember until the conclusion of the last two chapters, he did not even mention Bitcoin at all. It was a book based on trying to understand the problem with the system and trying to fix it from within it. So he has a saying which I might fumble with, but I don't remember the exact phrase. But it goes, if somebody else knows it, please feel free to tell it. But I think it's somewhere on the lines that you cannot think within the system to solve the system. So it's also derived or inspired from Einstein's famous quote, that to fumble the exact quote, but it's that um, you are stuck with a certain problem because of the consciousness. Yeah, I'm just messing this up. So I'll quickly Google this if you guys can see my screen. Einstein.
Fullerene's code. Pretty similar. You can't solve the system's problem sitting inside the system or something.
Yep. So this is the Einstein code. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And yeah, I'll also look up Fullerene's code. But yeah, this highlights the idea that most people look at government debt and want the government to fix it, and they do not think outside of the current monetary system that we have all been adapted to believe as we have grown up. So just the recognition that just data alone can be misleading is the takeaway from this. That sometimes we think that the problems can be solved by somebody making sure that those numbers highlight the correct thing. But currently, Bitcoin is not a unit of account, so it takes more than just the numbers to be able to imagine a new money. So that is the takeaway from a economics lesson. If I think there ever was one, that numbers alone can always only tell you one side of the picture. Yeah.
I think that Buckminster's quote was you never change system by fighting reality. Something like that.
Yes.
So
Yes, I think yes. It was not unconscious now. Yeah, something on the lines. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Yeah, this if there ever was one quote on Bitcoin to perfectly summarize without mentioning economy or anything else. Right. So yeah. So sometimes we feel that the greedy corporations are the problem and someone needs to fix them. But that stems from the understanding that we need somebody to control money. And historically, that has led to cycles of destruction. So it has always led to um, a scenario where it started off as a good system because you had trustworthy leaders. Debt could be used judiciously in the short term, but it always ends up being a system of exploitation and just systemic failure. For example, if we only look at a portion of the picture, it can seem unfair that the storekeeper has so many goods and other people have none. But looking at the full picture, we realize that these goods are not the storekeepers to use, but are merely goods in progress to their final use with consumers. The storekeeper is not a hoarder and has little economic power. The storekeeper is providing the service of making those goods available to consumers and depends on their willingness and ability to buy the goods to make ends meet. Without the store, the customers would need to buy each and every item in bulk from a wholesaler. The storekeeper offer us convenience of many goods in one place. Right. Yeah. So starting the subtopic, a coordinated process. There is more to the economy than the production of a good that we see sitting on a store shelf. Its production was possible because there exist other processes in production. For example, a producer of candy usually does not produce the sugar, flavoring, or coloring that is in it. Candy producers rarely produce the machines they use to make the candy. The building where they produce, package, and prepare the candy for shipping, the power plant to supply them with electricity. It is not enough to say that candy is produced by only one person before it ends up on the store shelves. In fact, candy producers could not make their candy if there were not already producers of the necessary ingredients already available. So I think Yeah, on a very layman friendly term, it's like focus on your craft so that you're able to produce using other people's crafts more that you could have produced all by yourself. So something as simple as candy again might seem something like some individual can start a business of, but when you understand the processes involved in it, you realize that you are better off adding value to other processes and not coming up with your own process for most things. So, yeah, Satoshi defined that if it was one entity that I mean there was a decades of research and the understanding of a scarce money was always there. But yeah, that might be not be a good example.
I think Satoshi implemented that and exhibited that, not defied that. Bitcoin is a
Right.
perfect example of a lot of failures that, I mean, Satoshi took the best things out of a lot of preceding failures and integrated all of them into one thing called Bitcoin.
Right. Yep, and it's been a long process. It's not a new defined problem. So it's also defined specifically in computer science with something called Byzantine generals problem. And I think Austrian economics. I might be quoting this incorrectly, but I think they were always cognizant of money being scarce. So Bitcoin is absolutely scarce. So the process was going on for centuries minimum. Another thing, Faisal, what did you say? I had a reference to that I wanted to also share. What did you had just?
Just now.
Yes.
I mean, I think you were talking about how a person cannot even make a candy on his own. He needs a lot of other people, a lot of infrastructure, other vendors, people who manufacture or cultivate sugar, etc., etc. And I think then you went on to say that Satoshi defined that. That was my understanding.
Right.
So I said Satoshi did not define that. Satoshi rather exhibited that because a lot of people created a lot of digital currencies prior to Satoshi, and all of them failed, but they all have something or the other good in them. And Satoshi took the best of all failing currencies and like the amalgamation of those best things that Satoshi took from all the preceding failing currencies turned out to be Bitcoin.
Right. Right. I can't remember the exact reference that I wanted to say, but I think it was on the idea of how things when they put together when they are put together at a certain process have their nature being changed. So I mean it's the core concept of chemistry, right? That you bring together two separate elements which have different properties. The combination of them through molecules and compounds can produce completely out of the imagination properties that you will never expect two elements to have. So in
And those
Bitcoin,
elements in isolation might be of absolutely no use, but when they come
right,
together, they become really virtuous.
right. So yeah, Bitcoin. That's why Bitcoin is some idea which is beyond just computers, just economics. That's why I think it's become a thing of its own. That there is no one school of thought prior to Bitcoin. That I think Cypherpunk Manifesto has come the closest. They were always aware of preserving digital privacy through private money, and private money on internet could only be solved in a decentralized fashion because otherwise the custodian can always rug pull you or debase your money or do things. So Chaumian Mint did solve the problem of private banking, but Bitcoin solved the problem of money and the internet, which was not. Cypherpunks, I think, are the only people who are aware of the exact problem that they're looking to solve. I'll start from here. In sum, candy producer is part of a much longer supply chain that fills the gap in the overall production process, itself comprising lots of producers and specific production processes. Together, these processes, often carried out by different businesses, make a very long chain of operations that step by step produces the specific good from the original factors that were available to us at the dawn of time: nature and labor power. Someone cleared the land to grow sugarcane or corn. Someone decided to provide transportation services, which was possible because someone else had already paved roads and manufactured trucks. Those trucks could be manufactured because someone was already producing steel, plastics, and everything else trucks are made of. Steel could be produced because others were running mines and smelting plants. If we were to list all things that allow the candy maker to make candy, it would be a long list. Even small things like coffee that the candy factory workers drink on their break is the result of a long chain supply chain involving thousands of people in many countries. What is important is not to map out all the things that are involved in making a certain good, but to understand that the economy is all of these things working together. It would appear that it takes many businesses and workers to produce the long line of goods intended only to make that candy that you can then purchase. That is true in some sense. They were all involved and all of them were necessary for the final good to be made available to you. But the miner, of course, has no idea that the ore taken out of the mine will become the steel that is smelted onto into a part of the machine that produces the candy you can buy in the store today. The coffee bean grower had no idea that his coffee would fuel workers in a faraway country making a special type of candy that you are considering buying. In the same way, the storekeeper doesn't need to know anything about all of the steps that have taken place before there can be a supply of candy to stock on the store shelves. Right. So I think one Bitcoin point that I want to highlight from understanding this is that Azteco, if you guys are aware of a startup started by Beauty On, I think it's in Argentina and US, and it's a way for vendors, local vendors and merchants to sell Bitcoin through a physical symbol or voucher that has the private keys and it's sealed, so you can verify that the store owner has not disturbed it. And the I think the most absurd way to highlight to a normie who might not be able to think in abstract concepts is that there is theft going on in society or there is something very wrong, is that you can't even trade those harmless those harmless looking balls that have your private key sealed inside them. It's like a toy that I want to sell and somebody wants to buy, somebody wants to keep it on its store. If you attempt to do that in India without getting the VDA license, you are a criminal. So it's I think yeah, this really stuck
Because
out to me.
eventually it's not a toy. I mean, you
Right.
are depicting as a toy, but eventually it's not a toy, and the government is not so naive that the government cannot distinguish between a toy
You
and the
understand
private
that
key.
there's just, I mean, I think, I mean, I agree, of course, but I think the point that I'm trying to highlight is that Bitcoin is just information sharing, right? Essentially, so the fact that they are telling us that us talking in however we want to do, which is through cryptographic concepts, we are somehow breaking some laws or we are harming the fabric of society, is the most crazy thing. The point is that elaborate, complex production process that produces any good you see in the store is not the design of anyone in particular. The overall process is not coordinated around producing specific goods. No one made a blueprint or flowchart specifying all of these steps and their order. No one estimated how much rock needs to be crushed to produce the iron ore that eventually is used in the production of candy. What drives the process is not the creation of goods, but the creation of value for you as a consumer.
Hmm.
Throughout the economy, business compete with each other to produce as much value as possible by producing and offering goods. We think of this as competition, the producing of the same or similar items, competing candy makers, for example. That is a very narrow view. Candy makers indirectly compete for the steel that is used in their candy machines, which means they compete with all other producers that use steel. The same with sugar and workers and the coffee that the workers drink. Maybe some of them even use sugar in their coffee. Right. So I think the last line highlights how if you're trying to understand coffee, you'll end up being in a place where you're trying to understand sugar. And I think to understand sugar, at one point you will understand production of sugar. At one point you'll run into coffee as an ingredient in the process because that's what has kept those factory workers alive and up and running. So human labor and nature together have produced all the wealth that humans can have ever conceived of. Uh, and a lot of processes come together to change the nature of the thing itself. So that's how when you try to break down a process to its pieces, you quickly realize that it's a process, and that's the most information that you can derive, and that's the humility that you have to come up with, and not trying to understand each bits and pieces in the economy and thinking that you can plan it. Why does some of the steel produced go to the machines that produce candy? Right. So why do some of the steel produced go to the machines that produce candy? The answer to this question will be discussed at length in chapter 5. Right now, it is sufficient to note that all businesses are involved in producing directly or indirectly goods that are intended for consumers. All of production has this aim. Whether or not producers of steel, for example, know exactly what the steel is going to be used for, they do not know and do not need to. It is the value that consumers see in those goods produced that determine how much they will be willing to pay. That payment is what justifies the business's investments and expenses throughout the economy. Consequently, what indirectly coordinates what all businesses do and how they do it is their expectation that they are contributing to providing consumers with valued goods. Hmm. So yeah, I think I'll just take a quick pause here. Somebody wants to add any points, but just a quick summary of this passage is that all of business are involved in producing value, and the only way or the only relevant information that you can derive out of this process is that it is the value which consumers saw, not the process necessarily, because when you're trading any sophisticated goods or services, you're not aware of the process behind it. It requires expertise and energy and time. So what you are concerned with, or what all actors of the economy are concerned with as consumers, is to just see the value behind those processes or the value generated because of those processes. Yeah, I'll take a pause here. Okay, so let's start with continuous innovation. It is important to note that competition goes beyond the businesses and production that we see. Yes, those businesses compete. As we saw above, they compete both directly and indirectly by trying to buy the same inputs and trying to sell to the same customers. However, there is a much too limited view of competition that leaves out what is important in the longer term. Businesses do not only compete with existing businesses, but also compete with businesses that do not exist yet. And the businesses that exist are the outcome of such competition that already took place. Right. So yeah, I think the idea is pretty clear here that businesses are not just competing with each other, which is the only information that you can get in front of your eyes, but they're also competing with the possibility that some other business or some other idea might make them obsolete, or they are competing with because of so many factors that they might not see right now. So yeah, and it's like the winners ride the war, right? So when you see businesses in the world that are successful, it's because of all the competition that has gone behind in making them successful or making them the businesses that we see out there. If this sounds strange, it is because we are used to looking at the economy as a state, as a snapshot, and not as a process. Those businesses that exist today are the survivors of a comparative weeding out process that has already taken place. It is because though these businesses were better, more productive, offered higher quality goods, that they are currently in business. And they will stay in business only if they continue to be better than the competition. They need to outperform not merely the other surviving businesses, but also those businesses that have not yet been started or that are still developing or refining their products. This includes businesses producing goods that do not yet exist and may not even have been imagined yet, but that could provide consumers with more value than the goods already available. Yes, it's like continuous innovation has been the story for the last 200 to 300 years. So any business that right now is involved in any process of producing some valuable good or service is already competing with innovation itself, because some other entrepreneur or scientist can come up with new methods and new ways to make your idea relevant that you did not even consider or could have imagined. The
One
innovation of
example, one example that I can come up with, like as the author mentions, that you're not only competing with the contemporary businesses, you always need to, as an entrepreneur, have it at the back of your mind that there might always be a new business that might come into existence in the future and make you obsolete because they are offering a good and service better than yours, or maybe the same good and the same service at a cheaper price. And one example that always comes to my mind when I hear anything of this sort is Nokia, a company that once upon a time had, I think, more than 90% of the smartphone market. Okay. And then Google came up with Android, its own operating system. Instead of syncing up with the evolution of operating systems, Nokia decided to be stubborn and did not adopt uh, Google's operating system. And today nobody remembers that company. So it's highly imperative that businesses need to evolve and constantly think about the future, because there might be somebody around the corner who might come up in the future and offer a good or a service that might make them obsolete.
Yep. Yeah, and that has been the theme that currently the big tech monopoly in the world is also in a lot of people's minds absolute monopolies and behemoths that will never be replaced. But we're already seeing better alternatives being built. So decentralized or censorship, social media is not what most people value, but Nostr, because it's an open protocol, allows for better social media platforms than Twitter or any of centralized social media platforms. And it's like most big tech businesses are not seeing Nostr as a competition. So unless you're receptive to the innovation that's happening as a protocol on a protocol for Nostr, you are not competing with that idea anymore. And that has historically led to a lot of monopolies falling, which nobody could have foreseen, like Nokia.
But I personally see alternatives like Nostr or Linux or DuckDuckGo to be very niche, even in the next 1 or 2 decades. It is going to be very, very difficult to get people off their Apples and their Googles and their Amazons. It's going to be very, very tough. It might even take generations for that
Right.
transition to happen. If it happens at all, or maybe there'll be just a bunch of sovereign individuals who will be using these decentralized private protocols, the ones that are ahead of their time, like 1 or 2%, like Bitcoiners are right now, and maybe the remaining normies will still be stuck with the
Right.
big tech itself, and they're content with it.
Right. I can't remember the quote. It was by an American Constitution founder. It was on liberty of how. So I think normies. The problem with normies is that sovereign individual. Even if most people who are thinking on those, I will find it later because I might not. I don't want to mislead with any other quote. But the idea was. Wait. First, I'll just tell that I was talking about how normies do not understand these ideas, and sometimes we believe that this is the where society is heading, and we are confident that we are seeing ahead of time. At least with privacy, I believe that that's not the case. I think it will always remain something that you have to actively guard, and it will never become an idea most people subscribe to. So Google or Facebook will always be more popular compared to Nostr or DuckDuckGo. So it's like active decision that people take. They are aware that they are leaking private data, but they do not value that. So it's not like there are most people who value privacy are seeing ahead of time. They are just people who have their own subjective values.
True. I mean, it's just like you said that it's not that these people are not aware that their data is getting stolen. They're just absolutely comfortable with it. It's become a norm. And
Right.
there are like 1% of people, let's assume, in the world who own Bitcoin. It's not that the other 99% don't know that their savings are being robbed
Right.
away in the form of taxation or inflation. They know, but they have accepted that as a part of no of they've like normalized it, and they've accepted that this is a part of the society and this is how the society functions. It's not always that people who don't own Bitcoin don't understand the difference between Bitcoin and fiat. They do, but still they're content with fiat.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean it's sad that fiat is not even fiat, which is by decree in definition terms. It's by acceptance. Most people are willing to accept the cost. So I think as Bitcoiners, or at least as human beings, as much as we care about our friends, society, and the wider world, we find it important to educate people. So we also have to be aware that which people actually need us. So most people are happy with this decision. So there's that famous Bitcoin meme that, hey, government steals from people. That's really bad. Somebody says, hey, here's Bitcoin. You cannot steal. Nobody can steal this from you. So like, no, fuck off. I want government to steal from other people. It's like most people are willing to subscribe to the system. So it's a matter of reaching people who are not aware that this is what is happening, and not trying to orange pill the entire world.
True. I think there's a famous quote by Satoshi as well that I'm sure you must be knowing,
Right.
or we can find in Google very easily. I don't have the time for you. If you don't understand it, if you
Right.
don't get it, I don't have the time for you. Something like that. Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
people
Yes.
who are actually curious and want to come out of the fiat monetary ecosystem, yes, you should go out and help them. And people who are stubborn, then you're just wasting your time with them.
Right. So yeah, the quote is, if you don't believe it or don't get it, I don't have the time to try to convince you. Sorry. So yeah, like the humble genius and the arrogance that Satoshi has carried. I don't think he's arrogant in most messages. This might be a misunderstanding of his quotes. But yeah, this quote is clearly articulating that it's a value-based opt-in that most Bitcoiners do. So I mean, I think this could just be my opinion that it's the idea or the value proposition that all of us subscribe to, and it's an opt-in. So if you do not understand, it's not like you're missing out. It's like you're missing out because you do not value these things. So have fun staying poor, or the game theory of Bitcoin compared to social media is very different, because economic laws converge to one money or one most highly valued good. So the cost of not opting into Bitcoin is a cost and not just a subjective value decision, because you pay pay for it by being poor. So,
True, and I mean now that we're talking about quotes, I'm sure you must have heard that as well. You can what's that? We can avoid reality, but you can't avoid the consequences of
right.
reality. right? So you can avoid Bitcoin, but you can't avoid the consequences of not owning Bitcoin.
Right. Yep. So I'll also just, if someone is new here, please feel free to ask questions or, I mean, there are no stupid questions as they say. But if somebody, I think, wants to understand Bitcoin, I think macroeconomics or just the macroeconomic policy, I think captures the phenomena or the subject is the most important thing. It's like we're not even reached the stage of consensus on a social layer. Forget how it is technically implemented, which is a challenge in itself. Most people trust their favorite developer to understand how Bitcoin works technically. So before we can arrive at those second more difficult questions, the first layer itself that most people do not realize the value of a fixed supply money is the biggest problem. So yeah, we'll start from here. The innovation of new. Yep, we had read till here. The innovation of new goods production techniques, materials, and organization, and so on fundamentally changes how an economy produces value, goods, and what goods are produced. In the era when horse and buggy was the standard means of transportation, there was certainly competition between stables and transportation businesses, just like there was competition between buggy manufacturers. But if we look at only those businesses, we could never explain how they were replaced and competed by businesses that brought on the age of automobiles. Today, there are very few businesses profitably producing buggies. The reason is that automobiles provide customer with greater value. So right, so buggies were competing with automobiles, and it's like if even if there are some profitable buggy companies, not being innovative and competing with the possibility that some better value creating tool will exist in the world makes you irrelevant, or it's a cost that you pay by avoiding the reality of continuous innovation. Seen from the perspective of consumers, horse buggies were valued goods until there were affordable automobiles. The automobiles provided greater value, which is why they undermined the profitability of and ultimately destroyed horse and buggy businesses. This is sometimes referred to as creative destruction that makes the core of economic development. Older and less value creative production gives way to new and more value creative production. So yeah, value creative production or creative destruction refers to the phenomena that more and more businesses are being destroyed, but it's with technology, but it's creating greater standards of living and value for society because it increases productivity. We come up with better ways to make more out of less. When we recognize that this creative destruction is real and that it places constant pressure on businesses to innovate and reinvent themselves so as to not be replaced, we realize that it is impossible to understand the economy as anything other than a process. Economies evolve and unfold over time, they reinvent themselves. Competition is not merely the rivalry between two or more businesses producing and selling similar things, but the constant pressure to serve customers better, both present and future. History is full of successful and influential businesses, many of them considered too big and powerful to compete with. Most of them are long gone and forgotten because someone figured out how to produce more value for consumers. Right. One, I think, quote I recently heard and found really interesting was that the price is decided at the margin. So, what's important about that, in my opinion, is that when we see some new process, phenomena, invention come up in economy or in the world, we see that it's accessible to everybody because it's knowledge, and knowledge can be shared. So knowledge is not scarce in terms of being able to share it. So when somebody is able to share knowledge, it spreads out from the margins because there's nobody controlling how knowledge works. So through that, we see margin innovations at margins, which creates a lot of value because um, they are the most incentivized to create most value at the minimum cost because they do not have the control of monopolies. So I'm mixing a few things, but my point was that that's what creates value. So it's like transporting Bitcoin is so cheap that sometimes it's too good to be true for most people. When I try to explain somebody that you can send crores of money for 500 transaction fee, for people, or there's nothing called illiquid assets in Bitcoin, right? Because in most traditional fiat investments, your asset might be illiquid, but because the the quote that Andreas says is, don't confuse the message with the medium. So the message is sound money. The medium is internet, which is a very primitive tool in terms of Bitcoin. So most people are aware that the internet exists. And I think the white paper also mentions this, that the infrastructure, the network can run on minimal infrastructure. So it's like Bitcoin power does not rely on its cost in terms of being able to use it. It relies on the value or the message or the idea that it has given birth to. Continuous uncertainty. Let's start here, or let's take just a pause for a few seconds. I'll start with continuous uncertainty. Although the economy and especially the market economy is best understood as a process, it would be a mistake to think of it as a production process. We briefly addressed this above, but it is worth reiterating and elaborating on. An economy comprises production processes, but those production processes are themselves selected. They are the ones that survive the constant weeding out of less value creative production. Many of those surviving production processes will in turn be weeded out as new and more value creative ones are attempted. A production process consists of operations that make specific outputs from specific inputs. A production process consists of of operations that make specific outputs from specific inputs. It is typically but not necessarily designed and organized. We can think of it as what happens within a factory. The exact operations that take place within the factory can change over time, and so can the people and machines. Most of the parts are in some sense replaceable. Sometimes the factory itself is repurposed, but what makes it a factory is the same. It transforms inputs into outputs. The factory does not manufacture outputs in general. It is not a magical production machine. A factory produces clearly defined outputs, goods, using an engineered production process that requires specific inputs in certain quantities. None of this applies to the economy as a process. The output of an economy is value in the form of consumer goods, but the actual goods produced change over time, and so do their respective value. The process of an economy is not its actual productions, the production processes and goods produced, but the continuous selection of those productions that provide the greatest value to consumers. Computers replaced typewriters and revolutionized office workflow, just as the automobile replaced the horse and buggy because it provided consumers with more highly valued transportation. Most all of our goods today and the processes that produce them will sooner or later be replaced by better, more valuable ones. An interesting question that I think I have is so this is a ongoing debate that can Bitcoin be replaced by some other money in future? Is there some better way to create a sound money than Bitcoin? So it's like if we are being humble to the process of economy, there is no 100% certainty that we can ever come up with. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
I don't think so. This is my opinion. I might be like very passionate or whatever, but not in our lifetime and never. I mean, you cannot intentionally create Bitcoin. No? Bitcoin just happened. You cannot intentionally create it. Bitcoin just happened.
Right.
So you can't create that. You can't premeditate or preempt something that is impromptu. If it happens, I mean, you can't, if two people are coming down the stairs, like if one person just impromptu falls, okay, you cannot emulate that. You cannot intentionally fall and get as injured as the person who fell impromptu. So things that happen impromptu, things that happen organically on their own, you cannot induce them. You cannot orchestrate them. It will not bring the same result. If an accident happens, the repercussions are going to be very high. You cannot intentionally recreate that accident again. It's just not possible. So Bitcoin just happened, and you cannot uh, try and redo it again voluntarily. I don't think it's going to happen, not in our lifetime, and I personally don't feel ever again. I think this is the first and the last opportunity for humans to have sound money.
That's also why it's just such a once in a humankind opportunity for all of us, right? The phrase is not just that it's a once in a generational, because that's like you're thinking 10, maybe 15 progeny away. But when you're thinking of humankind, you realize that the opportunity, um, I mean, it's emerging as a thing of its own. So it's like a species evolution upgrade.
Also, like even if there is this like hypothetical utopia coin, then the biggest problem they would face is the problem of distributing the coin. It's just impossible to think about how it can it's just impossible to solve problem.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. So I think what Faisal, have you read about homomorphic encryption or how Liquid works?
No, I haven't.
But I think you will find it really interesting, and it will make for very interesting questions and conversations, or at least as an idea, because homomorphic encryption is like a new cryptographic primitive that we have not covered in any of the cohorts or something. But it allows to do a lot of very valuable traits which were not possible using any other cryptographic primitives. Which is what Liquid uses, that it produces block every minute by hard code. So it's not based on proof of work and determining that somebody has expended energy. It uses homomorphic encryption, which allows you to prove a certain mathematical truth without revealing the details. It's like you can prove x plus y equal to z without revealing what x and y are. So you can prove that you had this output. But I might be going too much into detail. I mean, I might be not be accurately defining these terms. So I'll stop here. But there's potential. There's some posts that say that we can do this on Bitcoin on chain as well. So it might reduce the security budget of Bitcoin, but it will still just be Bitcoin. So yes, thinking out loud at this point. So
I personally feel if Satoshi had the wildest of ideas that Bitcoin will actually be worth 72,000 US dollars in 2024, he might not have been as neutral as he was. This is what I feel. He might,
right, you might not have been as
as neutral as he was, like he was open to anybody mining it. He did not secure any share for himself. These are specific coins for Satoshi. He was just mining, and it just happened to be Satoshi because nobody else was interested. If anybody else would have interested, anybody else would have acquired 1 million bitcoins.
right.
Had they, if Satoshi was mining on a CPU and somebody came with a GPU and started mining, they would have had 1 million US dollars, because greed is something inseparable for humans. I think if
Right.
Satoshi had any idea that someday one Bitcoin is going to be worth 72,000 US dollars, maybe he might have secured it for himself. And now, if you try to recreate Bitcoin and you have it at the back of your mind that the currency that you are creating 15 years down the line, it might be worth 100,000 US dollars. It's impossible, infeasible for a human to not be greedy and allow everyone to have a level playing field. He will always reserve some share for himself, or he will always have some backdoor, because that's how humans are.
Right. Right, yeah, computing power is the only truth that Bitcoin recognizes. So it's like if we are going to pay for one heavy ledger, there's no reason for someone new to say that, hey, we can start it over again, because now it becomes a mouse race, right? So it's like nobody will subscribe to it anymore. It's like Bitcoin was the game that just, yeah,
And like the biggest question I have every time somebody tells me is there going to be a Bitcoin 2.0, is that
yeah,
why do you need it? Why do you need it? If your problem, if the problem that you're trying to solve is that the world is suffering from inflation and you need sound money, we
right,
already have Bitcoin. Why do you want another Bitcoin? There's absolutely no use case for another Bitcoin, right? If to go from point A to point B, you already have a bridge. It makes absolutely no sense to build another bridge on top of it, and one bridge underneath it, and five bridges on top of it, and five bridges underneath it. One bridge is sufficient for you to take a person from point A to point B. It just doesn't make any sense to have a Bitcoin 2.0.
right. Yeah, it's incredibly lazy thinking when people say that MySpace was replaced by Facebook, or there will be a new Bitcoin or Bitcoin 2.0, because it's
True.
fundamentally not trying to understand how Bitcoin works. Because it's
Well,
not
It's
just a
this
social network.
Yeah, the
well,
problem
Faisal, there is
Facebook is solving is different from the problem that MySpace was solving. It's not only about communication, it's about how you communicate. Okay, it's different in that manner. Like in Instagram,
Right.
you communicate through pictures, that might attract some people. On YouTube, you
I think
communicate through
also,
videos, that might attract some people. On X, you communicate through ideas, that might attract some people. But as far as solving the problem of inflation is considered, then there's only one route to do that, and that's by sound money. And Bitcoin is doing that. There are no
right,
multiple avenues to fix the problem of inflation.
right.
yeah, but there is a reason. There is a valid reason to create a shitcoin, Faisal.
What
To
is
loot
that?
people. That's not valid.
No, to steal other people's Bitcoin.
That is what I said, to loot people. Not a valid reason. No, there are hundreds of reasons to create altcoins, but not a single valid one.
Right. Nice. So yeah, so I think I'll share a video that I saw yesterday itself. It's like one YouTube search away. So I'll just quickly also just tell the story that it was recorded in 2013, and CNBC interviewed somebody who was a Bitcoin skeptic and one was a Bitcoin believer, right? So both of them had a interesting. It's like a short video. It's really interesting that he was trying to make him understand coin hits $100. But yeah, I think this video was a reminder to me that we sometimes think that Bitcoin is following a logarithmic curve. So we are not going to see 20x or 50x returns in our lifetime, or at least in the next 10 years. Then I think you're wrong, because Bitcoin is fundamentally different than just a communications network. I think because it's rooted in because money itself is a thing in itself. Money is information, but money is also a scarce good, which information couldn't have been before Bitcoin. So I think there is no reason that Bitcoin can not absorb a lot of money from shitcoins, gold, real estate, and become 50x or 100x 10 years from now. So in the last 10 years, it has been 1000x. So 10 years from now, 1000x, it's not. There's no reason to just say that just because it has 1000x in purchasing power in 10 years from now, it cannot do it again.
If I am not wrong, what you're saying is that what Bitcoin did in the past 10 years, it can't do in the next 10 years, as far as strictly the
It
price is
can. In
concerned.
terms of
Right.
yes, it can, and I think it will. It's. I mean, this is at least the argument that I'm right now trying to frame, is that because Bitcoin can still absorb a lot of monetary premium from everything else, right? Without necessarily causing hyperinflation or replacing fiat. It can still be just an asset which absorbs all the premium from gold, because like we can move this thing over speed of light, right? Why do I need to carry this heavy metal now outside of its industrial use? So it will absorb trillions and trillions of market cap from gold, real estate, and stocks, perhaps. So it's like Bitcoin can still 1000x, right?
A lot of millennials and Gen Z are going to inherit real estate and gold from their parents and are going to dump it in Bitcoin.
Exactly. And imagine what will that do to the price, right? So I'm not trying to be a trader right now, and I'm saying that hey, Bitcoin is. I'm not trying to sell you because you guys already sold on Bitcoin anyway. But yeah, my point is that it's a very lazy argument to say that just because. So there's a logarithmic curve, right? You guys have seen it. It's like the inverse of exponential graph. People say it will plateau. It will plateau because I think it will eventually plateau. When Bitcoin is unit of account, of course, you cannot expect purchasing power to 1000x in the next 10 years, because humans cannot produce at that rate. But currently, Bitcoin is like less than 0.5% of the economy. So it's like there is no reason that it cannot 1000x in 10 years, even.
Just to add on to this, right? Like I was thinking something in the similar lines. So one major component which we miss out is that yesterday, I think me and Shreyan, we were talking about something similar. The technology adoption curve, right? Like in 2012, I was using WhatsApp, and 2015, 2016, around that time, my parents had WhatsApp. And by 2017, 18, 19, by then, everybody working in the farm, even somebody working in a farm, started having WhatsApp internet phone. So this such a exponential thing happened mainly because humans inherently try to copy stuff from others. There is a saying, right? Like, show me your friends, and I'll tell you how you are. So basically, what we tend to do is that we copy things from others. It's I'm not telling it from a negative sense. It's pretty natural, and we copy things from others. Whatever works for others, whatever I see that is working for others, I want it for myself, because it works for others. It's likely to work for me. So I see something good in my neighbor's house. Yeah, if I like it, it's likely that I will adopt it, right? So, so talking about from the Bitcoin sense, when so many people start seeing Bitcoiners getting rich, right, getting rich in purchasing power terms, it's like, for example, like in our friend circle itself, I'm pretty sure that you will have at least like 20 to 30 people in your circle who know that you are into Bitcoin obsessively. And these people will at some point they will realize that, okay, this guy's purchasing power has multiple x in the last few years, and they would get curious and they would want to get in on it. and and their network also has another 20, 30 people in the same way. And at some point, it's gonna hit just escape velocity very soon,
Right.
and you wouldn't even know that when it hits this escape velocity.
Yep.
So I
There are
just subscribe to the theory that Bitcoin will hit as some kind of an
Right.
escape velocity from where there is no return.
Right.
I mean, there are two things I like to point out. Firstly, I liked how you said that there are people in your entourage, in your family and friends, 20, 30 people who know you're into Bitcoin obsessively. So we're not into Bitcoin, we're into Bitcoin obsessively. That is, it's now there's a difference between being in Bitcoin and being in Bitcoin is for normies. Like if you understand Bitcoin, you have to be not only obsessively, psychotically. I today only, I read a quote. Okay, I'll share it with you all in DM or whatever, in the or in the general section. There's a quote. I can't remember who it is, and that person said that when I'm not talking to you about Bitcoin, I'm just being polite to you.
Yep.
Okay. I was like, it's like, if I'm just being generous and I'm obliging you,
Yeah.
if you don't want to talk about Bitcoin and I'm still giving you my time and I'm engaging in a conversation, you be thankful. I'm just being polite to you. I'm just being humble to you. Otherwise, you're not worthy of my time if the conversation is not about Bitcoin. I've reached that point. So yeah, and secondly about the technology curve, yeah, I agree that that is also going to be a catalyst in Bitcoin's ascent because. Along with the FOMO that the media produces, firstly, it's inertia. People are used to gold and people are used to real estate. Okay. Money is something that people don't like experimenting with.
Right.
So that inertia of sticking to tried and tested mechanisms of real estate and gold, asking people to give that up and then switch to Bitcoin, that is going to be very difficult. And that is one of the like the most important obstacles. The second is the FOMO, obviously, that the media has created that Bitcoin is for tax evaders, it's for drug smugglers, it's for money launderers, it's for child traffickers, A, B, C, D, F, G. There are so many scams about Bitcoin. This fellow, you'll always find in the leading newspapers that this scam happened in Bangalore and this techie lost 50 lakhs and that techie lost 20 lakhs and this fellow got scammed in Bitcoin 20 lakhs every other day. You'll find. So the second thing is FOMO. The third thing is technological impediments. Like not everybody is sophisticated or technically literate enough to use Bitcoin, and that is why I personally I'm really averse of a lot of bashing that Bitcoiners do for platforms like, for instance, I mean, recently Jack Dorsey came up with this wallet, right, in which he holds one key. Okay, now a lot of people bash them that this is in violation to the cypherpunk ethics, and how can you hold somebody's keys, ABCD? But you have to understand that not everybody is competent enough to use a seed signer. Right, a lot of people will bash wallet of Satoshi. You have to understand that not everybody is in a position that they can back up their seed phrase and they can set up their own lightning node, etc. Right, so there are a lot of people who, and these tools and these intermediary tools that make a compromise between security and convenience are very important for somebody to make that transition. So I think people not being comfortable with the level of technology or the technical literacy that you need to be an absolute cypherpunk to use a seed signer, to run your own node, to have your own server, home server, etc. Not everybody can do that. So I think 20 years from now down the line that will be possible. I think 20 years down the line it will be very realistic for people to be building their own seed signers, running their own servers, having their own nodes. So I think once people reach that level of technical literacy, 20 years down the line, I see that happening. Then I think that will again be a very important catalyst in Bitcoin's ascent, because then technical incompetence will not hinder Bitcoin's growth, which is the case right now.
Well said. Right, but to just ask you to elaborate on the last point. Do you think Bitcoin is suffering currently because of incompetence of most people to be technically literate?
Not Bitcoin, every technology is suffering. Nostr will suffer due to that. Bitcoin will suffer due to that. Linux will suffer due to that. How many people? I mean, people know Apple is stealing their data, Microsoft is stealing their data, but how many people do you know in your family and your friends who can install Linux? Right? If only software development, there are very very few people. Like I come from a non-tech background. I have nothing to do with tech. Okay, I'm a non-tech guy. You, Shreyan, are a non-tech guy. There are very few people that you might be knowing who are non-tech guys and who use Linux. How many do you know? Except for you, Shreyan, I probably don't know anybody who has nothing to do with computer science, who's not a computer science, who's not a computer science graduate or not a software engineer or not a techie or not transitioned into IT, and he's using Linux. I don't know of anybody who uses Linux operating system or anybody who's not into
Same. I
computer
think I
science who's
also have
not.
to, yeah. Just I think Bitcoiners are their own breed. It's like the people that I know are not who are not from computer science background still value these things are Bitcoiners, and they go through the process of learning these skills for some weird reason for their own. It's not always obvious. Like they have to be a Bitcoiner to do it.
True. So, the point being, not only Bitcoin, but every niche technology does suffer because there's a very niche crowd that caters to it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, just on a very practical level, also, I think as long as people value paper money, we will always, we will never be able to use Bitcoin as unit of account for a long, long time. And I think unit of account does matter because, like we learned in this lesson, right, that even to produce a candy, you need to go through so many processes and derive and get your ingredients from so many places that it becomes impractical for you to consider doing it on your own. So it's like you're forced to trade with people who will value fiat. So when you are forced to trade with people, you the whole idea of Bitcoin, the revolution, the innovation is suffering.
Because you belong to that school of thought who's been bashing Michael Saylor since the past 5 to 7 days.
Why? Why? What did you do? No, I was not.
He went on a news channel and said that medium of exchange is a distraction, Bitcoin is a store of value.
Whoa.
And there are a lot of people, reputed people in Bitcoin who agree with that. And I mean, I won't bash somebody for saying that. I would be very happy if Bitcoin turns out to be a medium of exchange. But if somebody says that Bitcoin is a store of value, I won't bash that person.
No,
Okay,
yeah.
because I mean,
But most people who are buying assets at some point want to sell the assets at a profit.
People that use fiat
man, with you,
currency as a store of value, we call them poor.
Right. Right. Yeah, you pay the cost by being poor. That's the game.
Yeah. But the point being, I mean, like, if I'm not able to buy a coffee or 6 bananas for Bitcoin, I'm fine with that. Okay. But I want to pay pay for my education and pay for my
Right.
medical treatment and pay for my retirement and for my children's schooling. Okay. And you can do that using store of value. Okay. So I'm not saying that Bitcoin should not be or is not a medium of exchange. If it happens, and it should happen. But even if it doesn't happen and if it becomes a successful store of value, I'm still happy with it.
Right. I think yeah, Michael Saylor is not focused on the escape velocity bit of the game, right? Because at some point, why will people now trade bitcoins and accept paper, right? So at some point, it will become a medium of exchange because he will like, dude, just give me Bitcoin, right? Don't bother selling your Bitcoin and giving me fiat.
And I think these guys, because the stakes are very high, see, he's
Right.
a very important public figure, right? So he doesn't want to get in the bad books of the
Exactly.
government, right? If you're using Bitcoin as a store of value, but the government does not care at all, do whatever you want to.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
because
true,
there are
yeah.
people who buy paintings worth millions of US dollars and use it for us as a store of value. Government doesn't care, right? There is some
Right.
crazy guy who bought a tissue paper with which Lionel Messi, sneezed his nose, and he bought it for millions of euros. Okay, and he's using it as a store of value. Maybe in few years he'll be able to sell it, right? People use antique furniture as a store of value, or they use
Right.
some sword of Tipu Sultan or whatever for crores and crores of rupees. They buy it, right? That's a store of value. The government doesn't care. So as long as Bitcoin is a
Right.
store of value, the government doesn't care. The government is it gets concerned when you compete when you compete with them in issuing a legal tender. Okay, when you say
Right.
people will buy bread and butter, when you say people will pay with their electric bills, and people will inject fuel in their cars using this certain internet money, that is when you are directly contesting and pitting yourself against the government's biggest power. So somebody as influential as Michael Saylor, I think he's smart enough. He will never go on record and say to the government that, hey, your biggest power, I'm competing with it and I'm contesting with it, and I want to take the biggest power that you have away from you. So I think
Right.
he's being very diplomatic and very intelligent when he says that.
Yes, well articulated, yes.
And Mango, you have to post that in the group, man. I just since yesterday that's hooked on to me. Did you hear that? Jan, did that make sense to you? What you
Yeah,
said
of course,
on that interview? Yeah.
Yeah.
People who, I mean, that journalist was like, when are you going to sell your Bitcoin? Okay, and this guy is like,
Right.
you never sell your Bitcoin. So she got, pretty, she got a little agitated. She's like, how is it possible? Stock owners at some point in time they sell their stock. Real estate owners
Right.
at some point they sell their real estate. Gold owners. some point, what is wrong with these people? Like they say, no matter what at what price Bitcoin goes, you will never sell it. What are you want to do it? So that guy is like, people who save in fiat. Okay, so that journalist was like, at some point in time, you will have to sell it and convert it into fiat currency, right? That's what people. That is what an investment is for. He's like, people who save in fiat currency. We have a term for them. We call them poor.
Well, I would have listened to this like 20 times today.
I really. This is going to be another meme. Like the best meme in Bitcoin that I've seen since being a Bitcoiner is Michael Saylor's. There's no second best. It's my favorite meme. I think this one's gonna.
Yeah, he gets like triggered almost. There's no second best. He gets annoyed.
There are T-shirts, there are caps, there are whatnot. There's a whole merchandise section on this meme. There's no second best. And I think this one's going to contest with it, that people who save in fiat currency, we have a term for them. We call them poor.
Right.
Yeah, the background music is just done for man. It's just amazing, so catchy.
I saw it in the afternoon. It had a lot of likes and all.
Yeah. Let me see. 600,000 views.
Wow.
600,000.
When did it come out?
I think 2-3 days ago.
Oh fuck! Wow, interesting.
Yep.
So yeah, we have completed this chapter. In fact, so I'll just read out the last paragraph and then we can close off for tonight.
Yep.
Yeah, we are here. We cannot say which products will be attempted and even less which ones will be successful. Production, in other words, is always uncertain. It requires some form of investment before the value of the output can be known. This value is ultimately experienced by consumers when using goods, the expectation of which determines what price they are willing to pay. But it is not enough that goods satisfy wants, they have to do so in the eyes of the consumer to a greater degree than what he or she expects from other goods available. Only then will the consumer buy that product. It's like you're always taking a bet when you're trying to build a valuable good or service, because the opportunity cost for the consumer in future is to not consume anything else. So yep, we cannot say which products will end up being the most highly valued products. The number and variety of goods available depends on the imaginativeness of entrepreneurs and investors. In other words, the entrepreneur who imagines, envisions, and aims to create new valued goods drives the evolution of production in the economy. The consumer is then, after the fact, the judge of which entrepreneur's productions are of sufficient value to be bought and at what prices. The consumer, in other words, is sovereign, and through buying and not buying determines which entrepreneurs earn profits and which entrepreneurs suffer losses. So the free market takes care that everybody is a servant in the world, because if you have to survive, you have to cater to the consumer that you are producing the value for. So you're always serving the market, even as a CEO, even as a founder, even as anybody who is participating and trading with other people. Yeah. So that's how Bitcoin changes the world. But yeah, we have completed market, and we can start with production and entrepreneurship in the next session.